Imagine a world where leaders make decisions from behind closed doors, ignoring the very people they are meant to serve. Sounds familiar? Now imagine a leader who truly listens, who understands before deciding, who feels the pulse of their team and community. That leader doesn't just lead, they inspire loyalty, spark innovation, and drive change faster than any rulebook ever could. Empathy isn't soft, it's urgent. In a world moving faster than ever, where every choice impacts real lives, leaders who fail to understand their people fail to lead at all. Today, we'll explore why empathy isn't optional. It's the competitive edge that separates ordinary leadership from extraordinary impact. Influence doesn't begin with authority. It begins with understanding what men are taught to hide. From an early age, many men are conditioned to suppress emotion, to equate strength with silence, and to measure worth by results rather than relationships. Leaders who recognize this reality don't try to overpower it, they work with it. Empathy becomes powerful when it acknowledges the internal pressure men carry, the need to perform, provide, and protect, often without permission to admit uncertainty. When a leader sees that pressure and names it without judgment, something shifts. Resistance lowers and trust takes root. Men respond to empathy not because it removes standards, but because it restores dignity. When leaders take time to understand what drives male behavior, competition, pride, fear of failure, they gain influence that force can never achieve. Empathy tells men, you are seen beyond your output, and that message fuels loyalty, accountability, and courage. It allows men to step out of defensive postures and into responsibility because they no longer feel they must prove their worth at every moment. Women often perceive the impact of empathy differently, and that perspective strengthens leadership even more. Many women recognize the emotional weight men carry, but are rarely invited to name it openly. When leaders integrate this awareness, empathy becomes a bridge, one that connects performance-driven psychology with relational intelligence. It creates environments where men feel safe enough to listen and women feel valued enough to contribute insight, leading to decisions that reflect both strength and understanding. Empathy becomes influential when it translates emotional awareness into meaningful action. Leaders who practice it don't soften expectations, they clarify purpose. They speak to the unspoken fears that stall progress and address them with honesty, creating momentum that comes not from pressure, but from belief, alignment, and shared resolve. Listening changes the power dynamic before a single decision is ever made. Men are often taught that leadership means having answers, speaking decisively, and moving quickly, yet this conditioning creates distance rather than direction. When a leader listens first, especially to men who feel the pressure to appear competent at all times, it signals safety. It tells them they don't need to posture or perform to be heard. In that space, honesty replaces defensiveness, and clarity replaces confusion. Men reveal more through what they hesitate to say than through what they confidently declare. A leader who listens closely notices the pauses, the guarded language, the frustration masked as indifference. This awareness matters because many men struggle to articulate emotional or psychological strain without feeling exposed. Listening becomes an act of leadership when it translates silence into understanding, allowing men to feel respected. Without forcing vulnerability, they are not ready to show, women often observe. This dynamic from a different angle, recognizing emotional undercurrents long before they surface verbally. When leaders listen with that same attentiveness, they bridge the gap between expression and restraint. Listening first validates the relational intelligence many women bring while honoring the internal processes men rely on to maintain control and identity. This balance transforms conversations into collaboration rather than confrontation. Leadership emerges not from speaking louder, but from hearing what others are trying to protect. When leaders listen first, they gain insight into motivation, fear, and loyalty, elements that can't be commanded but must be earned. Decisions made from this understanding carry weight because people recognize themselves in them, and influence grows quietly through trust, presence, and deliberate restraint. Ignoring emotions doesn't eliminate them, it simply forces them underground where they do the most damage. Men are often conditioned to treat emotions as obstacles rather than signals, learning early that control equals strength. In leadership environments, this belief creates cultures where frustration becomes silence, stress becomes withdrawal, and burnout is mistaken for discipline. The cost isn't immediate, but it is inevitable, showing up in disengagement, impulsive decisions, and the quiet erosion of trust. Men pay a particular price when emotions are dismissed because many lack socially acceptable outlets to process them. When leaders ignore emotional realities, men internalize failure as personal weakness rather than situational challenge. This internalization fuels anger, risk-taking, and emotional shutdown, all of which appear on the surface as poor performance or resistance. What looks like defiance is often unaddressed pressure looking for release. Women frequently experience the consequences from another angle. Watching emotional strain manifest in behavior long before it is acknowledged. When leadership overlooks emotions, women are often left to absorb relational fallout, miscommunication, tension, and unspoken conflict without authority to address the root cause. Empathetic leadership recognizes that emotional neglect doesn't just harm individuals, it fractures connection, undermines collaboration, and distorts perception across teams. Leadership that refuses to engage emotions forces people to choose between productivity and humanity. Men learn to survive by detaching, while women learn to compensate by over-communicating or withdrawing. Empathy interrupts this cycle by naming what is present but unspoken, allowing emotional awareness to become a stabilizing force rather than a liability, and restoring the human capacity required for sustainable influence. Innovation doesn't begin with ideas, it begins with connection between people who feel safe enough to think differently. Men are often driven by competence and results, which can make risk feel dangerous when failure threatens identity. Without connection, innovation becomes a performance where only safe ideas are shared and real creativity stays hidden. Leaders who foster connection remove the fear of looking incapable, allowing men to explore, question, and experiment without feeling that their value is on the line. Men take smarter risks when they feel understood rather than evaluated. Connection gives permission to speak before certainty is achieved, which is critical for innovation. When leaders empathize with the pressure men feel to be right, they create environments where curiosity replaces defensiveness. This shift unlocks problem solving not through competition, but through collaboration, where ideas are built together instead of defended in isolation. Women often strengthen innovation by sensing relational gaps that block creative flow. They recognize when voices are missing, when tension is silencing contribution, and when emotional safety is compromised. Leaders who value this perspective create inclusive connection, ensuring innovation benefits from both analytical courage and emotional intelligence. When men and women feel equally heard, ideas cross boundaries faster and evolve more effectively. Connection accelerates innovation by turning people into participants rather than performers. Empathetic leadership aligns emotional safety with high standards, creating momentum where men feel confident to challenge assumptions and women feel empowered to surface insight. In these environments, innovation moves faster because trust removes friction, and shared purpose replaces fear-driven hesitation. Trust is not built by promises or charisma. It is built by a leader's willingness to understand before being understood. Men often approach trust cautiously, shaped by experiences where vulnerability was met with judgment or loss of status. In leadership settings, this results in guarded behavior, measured words, and emotional distance. When leaders take time to understand what men value, respect, competence, and fairness, trust begins to form quietly, not through reassurance, but through consistency and recognition. Men trust leaders who recognize their internal conflict between strength and uncertainty. Many men feel pressure to appear confident even when navigating doubt, fearing that exposure will diminish credibility. Empathetic leaders notice this tension and respond with clarity rather than criticism. By acknowledging effort, intent, and struggle without lowering expectations, leaders create trust rooted in dignity. Men are more likely to commit when they believe they are understood as individuals, not just evaluated by outcomes. Women often build trust through relational depth, noticing patterns of behavior and emotional reliability over time. When leaders integrate this perspective, trust becomes inclusive rather than transactional. Women recognize when understanding is performative versus genuine, and they respond to leaders who listen without agenda. This relational insight strengthens trust across teams, allowing emotional intelligence to complement strategic direction. Understanding transforms trust into a shared experience rather than a hierarchy. Leaders who practice empathy create environments where men feel safe enough to be honest and women feel confident enough to contribute fully. Trust deepens when people see that their perspectives influence decisions, not just conversations. In this space, accountability feels mutual rather than imposed, and loyalty grows from alignment instead of obligation. Understanding sustains trust when challenges arise and pressure exposes character. Men watch closely how leaders respond under stress, noting whether empathy disappears when results are at stake. Women observe whether understanding remains consistent across personalities and power dynamics. When leaders maintain empathy during uncertainty, trust solidifies into belief, reinforcing influence that endures beyond authority and circumstance. Action doesn't stall because people are lazy or unmotivated. It stalls because they don't feel understood. Men are often driven to act when they see a clear path to competence and contribution. Yet hesitation appears when the emotional cost of failure feels too high. Leaders who practice empathy identify this hidden friction and remove it, not by pushing harder, but by aligning action with meaning. When men feel their intent is recognized, movement follows naturally. Men are more willing to take responsibility when empathy reframes action as courage rather than risk. Many men hesitate not because they lack ability, but because mistakes threaten identity and respect. Empathetic leadership acknowledges this fear without amplifying it, creating clarity around expectations, while offering psychological safety. Action becomes purposeful when men know they can act decisively without being reduced to their missteps. Women often act as accelerators when emotional clarity exists. They sense when hesitation is rooted in unspoken concerns and understand that momentum depends on addressing them. Leaders who value this perspective turn empathy into coordination, ensuring that action reflects both urgency and awareness. When women see their insights shaping decisions, they commit energy and influence that strengthens execution across teams. Empathy transforms action from compliance into commitment. Leaders who understand emotional drivers don't need to rely on authority to generate movement. They inspire it by connecting purpose to behavior. Men respond by stepping forward with ownership, while women reinforce progress through alignment and communication. This shared momentum creates action that is sustainable, intentional, and resilient under pressure. Empathy sustains action when conditions change and certainty disappears. Men often default to control when facing uncertainty, while women often seek connection to restore direction. Leaders who recognize both instincts can guide action without force, maintaining pace while honoring human limits. In these moments, empathy becomes the catalyst that turns understanding into decisive movement.